I'm Marcus Fitzgerald, 47, and I've been free for exactly 73 days after serving 10 years for a crime I didn't commit. Last week, at our mother's funeral, my brother David, the successful prosecutor everyone admires, pulled me aside while others gathered around her mahogany casket. "You know, Marcus," he said, adjusting his $5,000 watch, the one he bought after winning his biggest case mine. "Guilty people always claim innocence. Maybe prison taught you to finally own your mistakes." His perfectly practiced courtroom smile made my stomach turn. He had no idea I'd just received the DNA test results that would destroy his perfect reputation and reveal why he'd been so eager to see me locked away. If you've ever been betrayed by family, hit that like button, because what happened next changed everything. 10 years ago, I was grading chemistry tests in my classroom at Lincoln High School. It was a Thursday afternoon in March, and I remember the spring rain tapping against the windows as I marked another student's failed attempt at balancing equations. My life was ordinary in the best possible wasted job, small apartment, weekly dinners with Mum when David bothered to show up. The knock on my classroom door was firm, official. Through the narrow window, I saw 2 uniformed officers and felt my first flutter of concern. Had something happened to one of my students? Marcus Fitzgerald. The older officer's hand rested on his holster as I opened the door. "Yes, that's me. Is everything all right? You're under arrest for armed robbery and assault. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The words didn't compute. I actually laughed. Nervous, confused sound that died in my throat as cold metal clicked around my wrists. "There's been a mistake. I'm a teacher. I've never." "You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights washed over me like white noise as they led me through the hallways I'd walked for 8 years. Students peered out of classrooms, their phones already recording. Mrs. Chen from the math department pressed her hand to her mouth. The robbery, they explained in the squad car, had occurred 3 days prior at Goldstein's Jewelry on 5th Avenue. The owner, Mr. Goldstein himself, had been pistol-whipped when he tried to activate the silent alarm. $50,000 in merchandise gone. The perpetrator, a white male, approximately 5 feet 10, medium build, wearing a baseball cap and surgical mask. "I was home grading papers that night," I said, my voice shaking. "I can show you. They're still on my kitchen table with timestamps. Save it for your lawyer." The younger officer muttered. At the precinct, everything accelerated into a nightmare of fingerprints, photographs, and forms. They swabbed my cheek for DNA, though I didn't understand why that mattered if I'd never been to that jewelry store in my life. My one phone call went to Mum, who didn't answer. I left a voicemail that probably made no sense. Then David walked in, my younger brother, the golden child, the youngest prosecutor in the district attorney's office, stood in his perfectly pressed suit with an expression I'd never seen before. Not shock, not concerned disappointment, mixed with something else. Satisfaction. "David, thank God. There's been a huge mistake. I'm the lead prosecutor on this case, Marcus." His voice was clinical, professional. "I shouldn't even be here, but I wanted you to hear it from me. The evidence is overwhelming." "What evidence?" "I didn't do anything. Mr. Goldstein identified you from a photo lineup. Your height, build, even the way you walk, he was certain. And Marcus," he leaned forward, lowering his voice, "they found one of your school ID lanyards in the alley behind the store." The room spun. "That's impossible. I haven't lost my eye, reached for my neck where my lanyard usually hung. Nothing. When had I last seen it?" "I've recused myself from prosecuting you directly," David continued, "but I'll be consulting. The DA takes assault on elderly business owners very seriously. You're looking at 15 to 20 years. David, you know me. You know I would never." "I thought I knew you." He stood, smoothing his tie. "But then again, you always were good at hiding things. Remember when you broke Dad's watch and let me take the blame? Maybe this is just who you are when the stakes are real. That childhood incident, been 7, he'd been 5, and yes, I'd been too scared to confess. He'd forgiven me decades ago, or so I thought. But standing there, in that interrogation room, I saw my brother had been keeping score all along. The public defender they assigned me, Janet Holbrook, was fresh out of law school and overwhelmed with cases. She reviewed the evidence with tired eyes, the victim's identification, the lanyard, my lack of an alibi, and the security footage showing someone my exact height and build. The mask makes facial identification impossible, she said, but the jury will see what they want to see. What they would see, I realized, was David Fitzgerald's older brother, the underachiever, the one who never lived up to his potential, finally revealing his true colors. David would make sure of that. The details of the robbery emerged like pieces of a puzzle designed to frame me. Goldstein's jewelry wasn't just any store, it was a high-end establishment that David had mentioned visiting just months before to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend, Patricia. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidence. According to the police report, the robber had entered through the rear entrance at 9:47 p.m. On March 15th, he disabled the back door alarm with apparent knowledge of the system, moved directly to the safe, and demanded Mr. Goldstein open it. When the 70-year-old owner reached for the silent alarm, the robber struck him twice with a pistol, leaving him with a concussion and fractured orbital bone. The perpetrator knew exactly where everything was, Detective Morrison explained during one of many interrogations. This wasn't random. Someone familiar with the store's layout did this. The security footage they showed me was damning in its ambiguity. A figure in dark clothing, baseball cap pulled low, surgical mask covering the lower face. He moved with purpose, shoulders slightly hunched, about my height and build. In the grainy black and white, he could have been anyone. He could have been me. That's not me, I insisted for the 100th time. Look at the way he holds his arms. I have an old shoulder injury from college. I don't move like that. But Mr. Goldstein's testimony was unwavering. The eyes, he kept saying, I'll never forget those eyes. Cold, calculating. When I saw Mr. Fitzgerald's photo, I knew immediately. My alibi was pathetically simple and impossibly unprovable. I'd been home alone, grading tests. My laptop showed I'd been entering grades until 11 p.m. But the prosecution argued I could have set that up in advance, or returned home after the robbery. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, thought she remembered seeing my car in its usual spot, but she couldn't be certain of the date. The lanyard was the most damaging evidence. My school ID, the one I wore every day for 8 years, found in the alley behind the store. I remembered losing it or thought I did but couldn't pinpoint when. Had it been the week before, the month before? My memory felt unreliable under the pressure of interrogation. David visited me once more before the trial, this time at the county jail where I was being held without bail. In other victory for the prosecution. I've been thinking about Dad, he said through the reinforced glass. We both knew what he meant. Our father had died when I was 20 and David was 18, leaving behind debts and a reputation for gambling that had shadowed our family for years. I'm not, Dad, I said quietly. Aren't you? Single? No real relationships? Living paycheck to paycheck despite a steady job? Where does your money go, Marcus? Student loans? Rent? Helping Mum when she needs it, which you'd know if you ever asked. David shook his head. Mr. Goldstein says the robber mentioned needing money for medical bills. Mum's been having those heart issues. Don't you dare. My hands clenched into fists. Don't you dare use Mum's health too. I'm trying to help you understand how this looks, David interrupted. The jury will see a desperate man with a sick mother and a father's legacy of poor choices. They'll see someone who knew I'd been to that jewelry store, who could have easily taken my receipt from Mum's house. Studied the layout. Is that what you think happened? He met my eyes then, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker. Their guilt, knowledge, but it was gone before I could be sure. What I think doesn't matter. What matters is the evidence, and the evidence says you robbed that store. My public defender was building a case around reasonable doubt, but every meeting felt more hopeless. The prosecution had physical evidence, an eyewitness identification, and a compelling narrative. All we had was my word, the word of Marcus Fitzgerald, the chemistry teacher who'd never amounted to much, whose successful prosecutor brother had reluctantly identified him as a suspect. They offered a plea deal, Janet told me a week before. Trial, plead guilty, show remorse, and they'll recommend 8 to 10 instead of 15 to 20. I can't plead guilty to something I didn't do. She sighed, shuffling papers. Then we go to trial. But Marcus, you need to understand your brother's reputation carries weight. When he takes the stand as a prosecution witness, he's my brother. I said, still clinging to naive hope. When it really matters, he won't lie. But I was beginning to understand that David had been lying to me for years, hiding his resentment behind family dinners and birthday cards, waiting for the perfect moment to prove he was the better son. And somehow, he'd found it. The courtroom smelled of old wood and lemon polish, a scent that would forever remind me of the day my life ended. I sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, watching potential jurors file in. Janet had coached me on appearance look, professional but not wealthy, concerned but not guilty. Whatever you do, she'd said, don't look angry. But I was angry, furious at the system that had already decided my guilt, at the brother who sat behind the prosecution table like an avenging angel, at the 12 strangers who would decide my fate based on lies and circumstantial evidence. The prosecution's opening statement was a masterpiece of storytelling. ADA Rebecca Thornton painted me as a desperate man crushed by financial pressure, who'd seen his younger brother's success and snapped. She held up my school ID lanyard like a trophy. The defendant wants you to believe he's a simple teacher, dedicated to his students, but evidence will show that Marcus Fitzgerald carefully planned and executed a violent robbery, betraying not just a local business owner, but his own brother's trust. Janet's opening was competent, but uninspiring. She talked about reasonable doubt, rushed investigations, and mistaken identity. The jurors looked skeptical. One woman in the front row kept glancing at David with sympathy, as if she could already imagine his pain at having to testify against his own brother. Mr. Goldstein took the stand on day 2. At 70, he was a sympathetic witness, his voice shaking as he described the attack. The prosecutor showed photos of his injuries, purple bruises, swollen eye, stitches along his temple. The man who did this, Mr. Goldstein said, pointing a trembling finger at me, is sitting right there. Those eyes, I'll never forget those cold eyes. Janet's cross-examination tried to establish doubt. The store lighting was dim. He'd been traumatized. The attacker wore a mask, but Mr. Goldstein remained unshakable. I know what I saw. That man robbed me. The physical evidence came next. The prosecution's expert testified about the lanyard, found with partial fingerprints, too smudged to identify but consistent with being handled. The security footage played on a loop that hunched figure that could have been anyone, but somehow became me in the jury's mind. Then David took the stand. He wore his best suit, the charcoal one Mum had bought him for his law school graduation. His testimony was carefully crafted to seem reluctant, as if every word hurt him. I didn't want to believe it, he said, voice thick with performed emotion. Marcus is my brother, but when I saw the evidence, when Mr. Goldstein identified him, I had to put justice above family. He testified about my financial struggles, my father's gambling history, my mother's medical bills, all true, all twisted to fit the prosecution's narrative. He mentioned the childhood incident with Dad's watch, painting it as part of a pattern of deception. Has the defendant ever expressed resentment about your success? The prosecutor asked. David hesitated, as if struggling with loyalty. He's made comments about how things came easier to me, how unfair life had been to him. I tried to help, offered him money, but his pride, I wanted to scream. The money he'd offered came with strings, lectures about responsibility, subtle reminders of who was the success and who was the failure. But I sat silent, Janet's hand on my arm, looking guilty in my stillness. Janet's cross-examination of David should have been devastating. She had ammunition, his gambling debts from law school that I'd helped him hide from Mum, the DUI he'd begged me to keep secret, the pattern of taking credit for my achievements. But David deflected every attack with practiced ease. Yes, I made mistakes in my youth. Marcus helped me through them, which makes this all the more painful. I owe him everything, which is why I fought against believing the evidence for so long. The jury ate it up. The prosecutor brother, forced to seek justice against his own blood. It was courtroom theater at its finest, and David played his role perfectly. I testified on day 4 against Janet's advice. I couldn't stay silent while my life was stolen from me. But on the stand, I sounded exactly like what they thought. I was desperate, angry, guilty. I was home grading papers, I insisted. I've never been to that jewelry store. Someone planted that lanyard. Someone who knew my routine, who had access to my things. Are you suggesting someone framed you? The prosecutor asked, voice dripping skepticism. I looked at David then. He met my gaze steadily, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that he'd orchestrated all of this. But I had no proof, only the wild accusations of a desperate man. I don't know, I said quietly. I just know I didn't do this. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, not one would meet my eyes. On the charge of armed robbery in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, we find the defendant guilty. I heard my mother sob from the gallery. David put his arm around her, playing the supportive son while I was handcuffed and led away. The last thing I saw was his face concerned for the cameras, but his eyes holding a triumph he couldn't quite hide. The judge sentenced me to 15 years with possibility of parole in 10. Mr. Fitzgerald, he said, you had every advantage: education, family support, a respectable career. That you would throw it all away for greed and violence is truly tragic. But the real tragedy was that my own brother had stolen my life, and I was the only one who knew it. The bus to Ashford State Penitentiary smelled of sweat, fear, and industrial disinfectant. I sat shackled between a man with face tattoos who'd been telling anyone who'd listen about his third strike, and a kid who couldn't have been older than 19, crying silently. My own reflection in the window showed a stranger hollow eyes, 3 days of stubble, the beginning of what would become permanent worry lines. Processing was designed to strip away identity. Name became number, 30,847. Career became conviction. Armed robbery, assault. They took my clothes, my watch, the St. Christopher medal Mum had given me for protection. In return, I received 2 sets of blues, bedding that smelled like industrial bleach, and a harsh reality check from the intake officer. Chemistry teacher, huh? He looked at my file with contempt. You educated types always think you're better than everyone else. That attitude will get you killed in here. Keep your head down, follow the rules, and maybe you'll make it to parole. My cellmate was Marcus Big Country Williams, doing 25 to life for murder. 6'4", 300 pounds, with hands that could snap my neck like a pencil. I stood frozen in the doorway of our 8x10 concrete box, calculating how long I'd survive. You're gonna stand there all day, or you're gonna come in. His voice was surprisingly soft. "Bottom bunk's yours. Don't touch my stuff. Don't ask about my case, and we'll get along fine." That first night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of prison metal. Doors slamming, distant shouts, someone crying, someone praying. The pillow smelled like mildew and desperation. I thought about my classroom, my students probably hearing rumors about Mr. Fitzgerald, the armed robber. I thought about Mum, alone now with just David to comfort her. David, my brother, had sent me to this place. Morning came at 5 a.m. with lights that felt like assault. Breakfast was powdered eggs and something claiming to be sausage. I sat alone, marking myself as an easy target until Big Country dropped his tray next to mine. "First rule," he said quietly, "never sit alone. Makes you look weak. Second rule, find your people. White-collar crime. You'll want the old-timers in Block C. They run a chess club, book exchange, safer than general population." "Why are you helping me?" He shrugged. "Had a teacher once who gave a damn. Mrs. Rodriguez, 10th grade English. Only person who ever told me I was smart. Figure I owe the universe a favor." The next weeks taught me that prison was its own universe with its own laws. Respect was currency. Violence was language. Hope was dangerous. I learned to walk without making eye contact, but without looking scared. I learned which guards could be trusted and which would turn a blind eye to anything for the right price. I learned that everyone was innocent, according to them, but I was one of the few who actually was. Letters from home came sporadically. Mum wrote every week at first. Pages of local gossip and careful avoidance of anything real. "David's doing well," she'd write. "He got another promotion. He asks about you." The lies hurt more than silence would have. My colleagues sent a few cautious notes before fading away. Who wanted to correspond with a convicted violent felon? David wrote once, a single page on his official letterhead. "Marcus, I hope you're using this time for reflection. The family is struggling with your choices, but I'm helping Mum through it. When you're ready to take responsibility, perhaps we can begin to heal. Until then, I'll make sure Mum has everything she needs." I tore it into pieces and flushed it down the metal toilet. 3 months in, I made my first mistake. A young kid named Tommy was getting cornered in the showers by the Aryan Brotherhood. Without thinking, I intervened. Your instincts die hard. They backed off, but I'd marked myself. "You got a death wish?" Big Country asked later, cleaning blood from my split lip. "Those boys don't forget." But Tommy was grateful, and word spread. The teacher who'd stand up for the weak. It earned me a strange kind of respect and a target on my back. I started teaching basic literacy in my cell, GED prep in the library. It gave me purpose and, more importantly, allies. 6 months in, I'd adapted. I knew when to speak and when to stay silent. I knew which tables in the cafeteria belonged to which groups. I knew that Thursday meatloaf was actually edible and Mondays was punishment. I was surviving. But at night, when the noise died down to just ventilation and snores, I'd stare at the ceiling and plan. Somewhere out there, David was living my life, the free one, the successful one. He'd stolen a decade from me, maybe more. I couldn't prove it yet, but I had nothing but time to figure out how. The newspaper clipping arrived in a letter from my mother 8 months into my sentence. "Thought you'd want to see David's success," she wrote, as if his achievements could somehow ease my captivity. The headline read, "Prosecutor David Fitzgerald wins conviction in high-profile robbery, has an 81% success rate, makes him youngest senior ADA in county history." The accompanying photo showed David outside the courthouse, perfectly styled, flashing the humble smile he'd practiced since childhood. The article called him the rising star who chose justice over family loyalty and praised his integrity in helping prosecute his own brother. They'd rewritten history, turned him into a hero for destroying me. I smoothed the creases from the clipping and thought about the David I'd grown up with. The one before law school polished away his rough edges, and ambition consumed his soul. We'd been close once, or I'd thought we were. 5 years apart, different as night and day. I was the quiet one who loved science and books. David was the charmer who could talk his way out of anything. When Dad died, leaving behind a mortgage, credit card debt, and a reputation at every casino in a 100-mile radius, I was the one who dropped out of college for a year to work double shifts. David was 16, college-bound, our mother's hope for the family's redemption. "You make sure David gets his chance," Mum had said, exhausted from grief and bills. "He's special, Marcus. He's going to make something of himself." So I did. I worked warehouse jobs and tutored rich kids, saving every penny for David's college fund, while finishing my own degree at night. When he got into law school, I was the one who drove him to campus, helped him move into his dorm, slipped him grocery money when Mum's pension couldn't stretch far enough. "I'll pay you back," he'd always say. "When I'm a big-shot lawyer, I'll take care of everything." But somewhere between mock trials and moot court, David changed. Or maybe he finally revealed who he'd always been. The gratitude became entitlement. The promises became expectations. When he graduated summa cum laude and landed the position at the DA's office, he treated it as his due rather than the result of family sacrifice. I remembered the last Christmas before my arrest. David had arrived late, designer suit and new BMW, complaining about parking in Mum's working-class neighborhood. He'd gifted expensive things nobody needed: a smart TV Mum couldn't figure out, a watch I'd never wear to school. Showing off, still teaching, Marcus. He'd asked, as if my career was a temporary embarrassment. "You know, with your science background, you could probably get into forensics." I could put in a word. Always the same offer: let him lift me up, acknowledge his superiority, owe him everything. I'd declined, as always, preferring my honest work to his conditional charity. The truth I'd been too blind to see. David had always resented me. Not for anything I'd done, but for what I represented. I was the older brother who'd sacrificed, the one Mum still worried about. The reminder that his success came at a cost he'd never acknowledge. Every time he looked at me, he saw the warehouse shifts and ramen dinners that funded his education. He saw debt he could never truly repay, so he'd found another way to balance the ledger. The robbery at Goldstein's. David had mentioned that store months before my arrest. He'd been shopping for engagement rings, he said, though the engagement never materialized. Had he been casing it even then? Learning the layout, the security, planning how to destroy the brother who'd become an inconvenient reminder of harder times. I thought about the evidence against me. My missing lanyard. David had been at my apartment the week before my arrest, allegedly to discuss Mum's birthday plans. He'd had access to everything. The physical description that matched me so perfectly. Had similar builds, similar heights. In a mask, who could tell the difference? The victim's certainty about my eyes, but trauma did strange things to memory. And a skilled prosecutor could shape witness testimony like clay. There had been gambling, debts. I'd learned that from another inmate whose cousin worked at the casino where David had been a regular. Thousands owed to the wrong people, paid off mysteriously right after my conviction. Had someone offered him a deal? Frame your brother, clear your debts, and advance your career in one brilliant move. Your brother's a piece of work, big country, said one evening, reading the article over my shoulder. Youngest senior aider ever. Bet that comes with a nice salary bump. Blood money, I muttered. Most money is. Question is, what you gonna do about it? What could I do? I was a convicted felon with a number instead of a name, locked away while David collected accolades built on my destruction. He'd stolen more than my freedom. He'd stolen my identity, my purpose, my life. and he'd done it with such precision that even I sometimes wondered if I was crazy. If the conspiracy I saw was just the desperate fantasy of a guilty man. But then I'd remember his face in the courtroom, that flash of triumph he couldn't quite hide. I'd remember his visits during the investigation, asking questions that seemed helpful but were really gathering intelligence. I'd remember a lifetime of small betrayals that had prepared him for this ultimate treachery. David had always been special. Mum was right about that. Special in his ambition, his ruthlessness, his ability to sell his soul and call it success. And now he was the golden son, the family's pride, while I rotted in a cell for his crime. The perfect crime, really. Who would believe the convicted brother over the heroic prosecutor? But I had something David didn't count on: time. Years, stretching ahead with nothing to do but think, plan, and wait. He'd won this round, but the game wasn't over. It couldn't be. 2 years into my sentence, I found my salvation in the last place I expected, the prison education wing. What started as a way to fill empty hours became my lifeline, then my weapon. It began when Tommy, the kid I'd helped in the showers, asked me to read a letter from his daughter. "Can't make out all the words," he admitted, shame coloring his face. 22 years old, 3 kids on the outside, and he could barely read at a 5th grade level. "I could teach you," I offered. Used to be a teacher on the outside. Word spread through the prison telegraph. Within a month, I was running informal tutoring sessions in the library, teaching basic literacy to men who'd hidden their illiteracy behind bravado and violence their whole lives. The GED program coordinator, Mrs. Washington, noticed. "You're Marcus Fitzgerald," she said, reviewing my file. "Chemistry teacher, master's degree. What are you doing in here?" 15 to 24, being in the wrong family, I said, too tired. To maintain Innocence claims nobody believed. She studied me over her reading glasses. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I can usually tell the ones who belong here from the ones who don't. You want a job?" The official position came with privileged access to the law library, a computer for creating lesson plans, respect from both inmates and guards. I threw myself into it, teaching chemistry to anyone who'd listen, turning hardened criminals into students who actually cared about molecular structures and chemical reactions. But it was the law library that became my real education. Late nights, after teaching sessions, I'd pore over legal texts, criminal procedure, evidence law, appeals processes. I read about wrongful convictions, prosecutorial misconduct, Brady violations. I studied my own case file until I could recite every word of testimony, every piece of evidence, every ruling. That's when I found the first crack in David's perfect frame up. The prosecution had claimed the robbery was captured on the jewelry store's security system, showing someone my height and build. But reading through the technical specifications, I realized something. The timestamp on the footage had never been verified. The store's system had been malfunctioning for weeks before the robbery, recording intermittently and sometimes showing the wrong date and time. My public defender had never questioned it. Why would she? The prosecution said the footage was from March 15th at 9:47 p.m. and nobody thought to verify something so basic. I started writing letters to lawyers, to Innocence projects, to anyone who might listen. Most went unanswered. The few responses I got were polite rejections, insufficient evidence, resources limited, priority given to death row cases. "You're wasting your time," said Jerome, a lifer who'd become my chess partner. "Systems rigged. They got you, they ain't." Letting go. But I couldn't stop. Teaching during the day gave me purpose, but the law library at night gave me hope. I discovered more inconsistencies. The witness who'd found my lanyard in the Aaliyah homeless man named Carl Brennan had a history of providing tips to police in exchange for dropping minor charges. He'd been arrested for public intoxication the night before finding the evidence and released without charges the morning after. Coincidence? Mr. Goldstein's identification came into question too. I found research on witness trauma, how violence affects memory formation. His description had changed between the initial police report and trial testimony, becoming more specific, more certain. Classic signs of coached testimony. My students noticed the change in me. Where before I'd been a good teacher, now I was driven. I created a mock trial program, teaching legal reasoning alongside science. Why you care so much about the law, all of a sudden, asked Dante, one of my best students. Because ignorance of it cost me everything, I said, and knowledge of it might get it back. 3 years in, I had my first real breakthrough. An elderly inmate named Wilson was transferred to our block. Former cop, doing time for evidence tampering. We bonded over chess and shared cynicism about the justice system. Fitzgerald, he said one evening. Your brother's the prosecutor making waves, right? David Fitzgerald. My hand froze over a pawn. Yeah, knew I recognized the name. He was mixed up in something before your case. Gambling thing. My old partner mentioned it, debts to some connected people, paid off real sudden like. Always wondered where he got the money. When was this? Right around the time you got popped. Maybe a month after. Funny timing indeed. I added it to my growing file of coincidences that weren't coincidences, evidence that pointed to a truth nobody wanted to hear. The Getty graduation ceremony that year was bittersweet. 12 of my students walked across that makeshift stage in the prison gymnasium, receiving diplomas they'd worked harder for than most people could imagine. Tommy gave a speech that had hardened convicts wiping their eyes. Mr. Fitzgerald showed me I wasn't stupid, he said. Just never had nobody believe in me before. He's in here for some bad stuff, but he's done more good in this place than most people do on the outside. Mrs. Washington found me after. You've built something special here, Marcus. Whatever you did to get here, you're making amends. I didn't do anything to get here, I said quietly. That's the whole problem. She squeezed my shoulder. Then keep teaching and keep learning. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when someone's determined to dig it up. That night, I lay in my bunk thinking about David. Probably home in his luxury apartment, career soaring on the foundation of my destruction. He thought he'd buried me, but he'd actually given me the tools for resurrection. Every legal text I read, every precedent I studied, every inconsistency I documented was building my case for freedom, and maybe, just maybe, for justice. The visitor request form landed on my bunk like a grenade. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days into my sentence. I'd grown used to the routine mum's monthly visits, growing shorter and more strained, the occasional lawyer responding to my letters with polite rejections. But this name made no sense. Janet Morrison, you know her? Big Country asked, reading over my shoulder. Never heard of her, but something nagged at me. Morrison, why did that sound familiar? The visiting room was its usual depressing mix of fluorescent lights and desperate hope. Families clustered around, scarred tables, children trying to understand why Daddy lived in this concrete place. I scanned for an unfamiliar face and found her in the corner, a woman in her 40s, nervously clutching a purse, wearing sunglasses indoors. When she removed them, I understood. The haunted look, the dark circles, the way she flinched when a guard walked past. This woman was running from something. Mr. Fitzgerald. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm Janet Morrison. I testified at your trial. The blood drained from my face. Morrison, the prosecution's surprise witness who'd claimed to see me near the jewelry store that night, who'd sworn I looked agitated and suspicious. Her testimony had been brief but damning. Another nail in my coffin. You've got 30 seconds to explain why you're here before I walk away, I said, my voice harder than intended. I lied. The words tumbled out like a confession at gunpoint. Everything I said on that stand was a lie. Your brother David, he made me do it. The visiting room noise faded to white static. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, afraid if I let go, I'd either float away or lunge across at her. Start. From the beginning, everything. Her story came in fits and starts, tears interrupting the flow. She'd been David's paralegal at the DA's office, young and ambitious, eager to please. They'd had an affair brief, messy ending when David's fiancée found out. Janet had threatened to report him to the bar for ethics violations. David had countered with a threat of his own. He had photos, she whispered, compromising ones from a party. Said he'd make sure they got to my husband, my kids' school, everywhere. But if I helped him with one small thing, he'd make it all go away. So you lied about seeing me that night. I wasn't even in that neighborhood. David gave me a script, made me memorize every detail, what you were wearing, how you walked, the time I supposedly saw you. He coached me for hours, said it was just corroborating evidence that you were guilty anyway. Did you know I was his brother? She nodded miserably. He said you'd been an embarrassment to the family for years, gambling, stealing from your mother, that this was finally a chance to get you help through the system. I wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting I was destroying an innocent man. My mind raced through the implications. Here was proof of David's frame-up, sitting across from me in Prison Blue's visiting room. But why now? Why come forward after 3 years? Because he's doing it again. Her hands shook as she pulled out a newspaper clipping. Another robbery case, another defendant claiming innocence. David leading the prosecution. This man, Roberto Sanchez, he works at the community center where my kids go. He's a good man, Mr. Fitzgerald. And I can see the same pattern. Surprise witness. Convenient. Evidence. David pushing for maximum charges. You could stop it. Recant your testimony. Tell the truth. With what proof? It's my word against the star prosecutor. He'll destroy me, my family. I've already gotten threats, just for looking into the Sanchez case. She leaned forward urgently. But you're already in here. You've got nothing to lose. If you could find proof of what David did to you, maybe it could help Roberto too. I wanted to shake her, to scream that I'd had everything to lose my freedom, my career, my life. But beneath the anger was something else. Validation. I wasn't crazy. The conspiracy was real. Someone else could see David's pattern. I need specifics, I said, pulling out the small notepad they allowed in visits. Everything you remember about David coaching you. Dates, times, anyone else who might have known. For the next 20 minutes, she talked while I scribbled notes. David had met her at a motel outside town, paid cash. He'd had details about me that seemed innocent at the time, but now felt violating my walking pattern, my habits, things only someone close would know. He'd been specific about the timing, making sure her false sighting would fill a gap in my alibi. There was someone else, she said suddenly. When I arrived at one session, David was finishing a call. He said something about making sure Brennan stays bought. I didn't think about it then, but Carl Brennan, the homeless man who found my lanyard. Her eyes widened. David knew him. Another piece clicked into place. How many witnesses had David manipulated? How deep did this go? The guard called time. Janet stood quickly, eager to escape. Wait, I said. I need you to write this down. Everything you told me. Sign it, date it, send copies to multiple lawyers. Create a paper trail. I can't. He'll know it was me. Then Roberto Sanchez goes to prison for something he didn't do. How many more after him? She was crying now, ugly sobs that drew stares from guards. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't need your apologies. I need your courage. You helped put me here. Help get me out. She nodded, gathering her things with shaking hands. I'll think about it. Maybe I can find something, some proof that doesn't lead back to me. As she walked away, I knew I'd probably never see her again. Fear was a powerful motivator, and David had made himself someone to fear. But she'd given me something precious, confirmation that I wasn't delusional, that my brother had orchestrated everything. Back in my cell, I transferred my notes to the legal pad hidden in my mattress. Big Country watched from his bunk. Good visit, the best and worst I've ever had. I explained what I'd learned, watching his expression shift from skepticism to anger. Your own brother, that's cold, man. That's Antarctica cold. He's done it before, and he'll do it again. Unless someone stops him. Someone like you. Who else is there? That night, I wrote letters until my hand cramped. To the Innocence Project, with Janet Morrison's name and details. To Roberto Sanchez's public defender, warning about David's pattern. To journalists who might be interested in a corruption story. Most would go nowhere, but maybe one would stick. I also wrote to Mum, choosing my words carefully. Ask David about Janet Morrison, I wrote. Ask him why his paralegal left so suddenly 3 years ago. Ask him about the Sanchez case. I know you won't believe me, but maybe you'll start seeing the patterns I see. She never responded to that letter, but her next visit was different. She looked at me with something new in her eyes, not quite belief, but the beginning of doubt about her golden son. The Roberto Sanchez trial proceeded exactly as Janet had predicted. Surprise, witness, convenient physical evidence, David's passionate prosecution. I watched from prison as another innocent man was railroaded, knowing I was powerless to stop it. Sanchez got 12 years, but something had shifted. Other inmates started approaching me with stories. David's name came up in too many cases. Always the same pattern. A jailhouse lawyer named Mohammed helped me file freedom of information requests, getting trial transcripts, looking for patterns. Your brother's got a system, Mohammed said, reviewing the files. He targets people without resources, people with records or addiction issues, plants, evidence, coaches, witnesses, builds airtight cases against people who can't fight back. How many? In the 6 years since your trial, at least 8 cases that fit the pattern. Maybe more. 8 innocent people. 8 lives destroyed. To build David's reputation as the unstoppable prosecutor. And I was patient 0, the test case where he'd perfected his method. Janet Morrison never wrote down her confession. 2 months after her visit, I saw a small news item. Local woman dies in car accident. Single vehicle. No witnesses. The article mentioned she'd been suffering from depression, implied suicide. But I knew better. David was cleaning house. Her death should have discouraged me. Instead, it galvanized me. My brother wasn't just corrupt, he was dangerous. Every day I spent in prison, he was out there destroying more lives. Climbing higher on a ladder built from innocent people's bones. I doubled down on my legal research, teaching by day and building my case by night. I created charts, timelines, connecting David's cases with his gambling debts, his career advances, his systematic destruction of anyone who threatened him. You're obsessed, Big Country warned. Obsession makes you sloppy. I'm focused, I corrected. There's a difference. But he was right about one thing: I was running out of time. Not prison time, but real time. David was getting smarter, covering his tracks better. If I was going to prove what he'd done, I needed help from the outside. Real help, from someone with resources and motivation to dig into the golden prosecutor's dark secrets. I just had to survive long enough to find them. 5 years into my sentence, I'd become something of a jailhouse lawyer legend. The chemistry teacher who'd taught himself law, filing appeals with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. My cell looked like A law firm's storage room, boxes of transcripts, legal books borrowed from the library, handwritten briefs covered in corrections. My first appeal had been a disaster. I'd tried to argue ineffective counsel, pointing out everything my public defender had missed. The appellate court's rejection was swift and brutal. Defendant's claims lack merit. Trial counsel's performance, while not perfect, met constitutional standards. Translation: your lawyer was barely competent, but that's all the Constitution requires. The second appeal focused on the witness identifications. I'd found cases where similar identifications had been thrown out. Trauma affecting memory, suggestive photo arrays, contaminated lineups. I spent months crafting arguments, citing precedents, building what I thought was an airtight case for reasonable doubt. Rejected. Defendant's arguments were available at trial, and thus procedurally barred from appellate review. "You're fighting the wrong battle," said Muhammad, reviewing my latest rejection. "You keep trying to prove you're innocent. The system doesn't care about innocence. It cares about procedure. So what do I do? Find a procedural violation they can't ignore. New evidence they have to consider. Something that wasn't available at trial." That's when I started focusing on Brady violations, the prosecution's duty to disclose exculpatory evidence. If I could prove David had hidden something, anything, that might have helped my defense, I'd have grounds for a new trial. I filed requests for David's complete case file, den attorney work product privilege. I requested the police investigation, records, mostly redacted, with key pages missing. I demanded the original security footage from the jewelry store, mysteriously destroyed in a routine purge of old evidence. Every roadblock had David's fingerprints on it. "He's still protecting himself," I told Big Country during one of our chess games. "Still pulling strings to keep me buried. Man's scared." Country observed, moving his bishop. "Scared people make mistakes." The mistake came from an unexpected source. A new inmate transferred to our block, Winston Castillo, doing time for evidence tampering. He'd been a clerk in the DA's office during my trial. "I remember your case," he said during a conversation in the yard. "Your brother was obsessed with it. Worked late nights, kept files locked in his personal cabinet instead of central filing. Real secretive about it. Did you see any of those files?" "Nah, but I saw him shredding a bunch of papers right after your conviction. Thought it was strange. Usually we archive everything for appeals." My heart raced. Destruction of potentially exculpatory evidence was a serious violation. But I needed proof, not just the word of a convicted evidence tamperer. I started writing to law schools, begging for help from clinical programs that took on wrongful conviction cases. Most never responded. The few that did sent form letters. Unfortunately, our resources are limited, but persistence paid off. Professor Sarah Chen from Northwestern's Center on Wrongful Convictions agreed to review my case. Her initial assessment was blunt. "Mr. Fitzgerald, your case has troubling elements, but troubling isn't enough. The witness who recanted is dead. The evidence is circumstantial. Your brother's position makes accusations of frame-up seem like desperate conspiracy theories. Unless you can provide concrete proof of misconduct, no court will touch this." I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it. The system required proof that the system had deliberately destroyed, but Chen threw me a lifeline. "However, if you can, document a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct in multiple cases that changes things. Pattern evidence can overcome individual case weaknesses." So I became a collector of misery. Every inmate who'd been prosecuted by David, I interviewed. Every case file I could access, I analyzed. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Surprise, witnesses appearing late in discovery, key evidence mysteriously appearing after initial searches. Defendants with solid alibis suddenly having those alibis fall apart. Defense witnesses recanting or disappearing. David's gambling debts, coinciding with big convictions, created a database, cross-referencing everything. 8 cases became 12, then 15, all following the same playbook, all resulting in convictions that advanced David's career. "This is rectal-level corruption," Mohammed said, reviewing my work. "But you need someone on the outside to investigate, to find witnesses who won't talk to a convict." That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wrote to the FBI. The letter was carefully crafted, focusing on the pattern rather than my individual case. I presented it as a concerned citizen reporting potential corruption, not a bitter convict with an axe to grind. One included copies of my research, names of potential witnesses, connections to David's gambling history. Months passed with no response. I assumed it had been ignored like all the others. But then, during a routine visit from Mum, she mentioned something odd. "David's been acting strange lately, nervous. He hired a lawyer, says it's just routine professional insurance, but he seems scared. Has someone been bothering him about your case?" I kept my face neutral. "Not that I know of. How's he doing otherwise?" "Working constantly. Says he's up for a judgeship. Needs to clear some old cases first." She paused, studying me. "Marcus, I've been thinking about what you wrote about patterns. I'm not saying I believe, but I've started noticing things." It was the closest she'd come to admitting doubt about David. I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't risk her confronting him, warning him. 3 weeks later, Vincent Castillo was transferred to another prison. 2 days after that, Mohammed was thrown in solitary for contraband nobody could specify. The message was clear. David knew I was getting close, and he was fighting back. But he'd made his first real mistake. In his panic, he was creating more evidence of obstruction, more patterns for investigators to follow. The very actions meant to protect him were building the case against him. I kept filing appeals, kept documenting patterns, kept teaching my students while planning my brother's downfall, because Mohammed had been right about one thing: the system didn't care about innocence, but corruption, cover-ups, patterns of misconduct that made the whole DA's office look bad. That the system would care about, that could set me free. I just had to survive long enough to see it through. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was teaching advanced chemistry to a group of lifers. Officer Rodriguez pulled me aside with the expression that meant bad news. "Your mother's on the medical line. You've got 10 minutes. Mum's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Marcus, honey, I didn't want to worry you, but the doctors, they found something. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. They're talking about months, not years. The classroom, the prison, the last 6 years, everything faded except those words. My mother was dying, and I was locked in a cage 8 hours away. I'm starting treatment next week," she continued, trying to sound brave. "David's been wonderful, helping with insurance, finding specialists. He's taking time off work to drive me to appointments. David, of course, David was there, playing the devoted son while I rotted in here because of him." The irony burned like acid. "Mum, I can apply for compassionate release. Visit you, help, oh honey, don't get your hopes up. David already looked into it. He says, with your conviction, it's nearly impossible. But I'll visit as soon as I'm feeling better. The treatment might give us more time." After the call, I stumbled back to class, but Big Country took one look at me and dismissed the students. I told him about Mum, about the cancer eating her from the inside while David played caretaker on the outside. "That's rough, man. Your mum's, she's good people, deserves better than this." She did deserve better. Better than a husband who'd gambled away their savings before dying young. Better than one son in prison and another who'd put him there. Better than dying without knowing the truth about her boys. I filed for compassionate release that day, knowing it would be denied but needing to try. The form asked for justification, and I wrote simply, My mother is dying. She's all I have left. The first chemo visit never happened. Mum was too sick from treatment to make the 8-hour round trip. Our communication reduced to phone calls where she tried to sound normal while I heard death creeping into her voice. Tell me about your students, she'd say, deflecting from her pain. So I'd spin stories about Tommy's progress in algebra, about the lifer who'd discovered a love for poetry, about anything except the rage eating me alive. David occasionally took her calls, his voice dripping false concern. Marcus, she's fighting hard. I'm making sure she has everything she needs. The house is reverse mortgaged for medical bills, but don't worry about that. Focus on your rehabilitation. Rehabilitation. As if I was the one who needed fixing. The denial came swiftly. Inmate's crime involves violence against elderly victim. Risk to community outweighs compassionate circumstances. Translation: we don't care if your mother's dying. You scared Anne. Old man, so you can't say goodbye. I appealed to the warden directly. A man who'd actually complimented my teaching program. He listened, seemed sympathetic, then delivered the bureaucratic death sentence. My hands are tied, Fitzgerald. The board sees your brother's position as potential conflict of interest. They won't risk the publicity. So David's influence kept me locked up, even as Mum faded. The golden son protecting his reputation, while our mother died by degrees. The calls got shorter. Mum's voice grew weaker. She'd drift mid-sentence, the pain medication stealing her thoughts. David started answering more often, filtering information like a prison censor. She's sleeping more, he'd report. The doctors say that's normal. She asked about you, wanted to know if you're eating enough. I told her you're fine. Let me talk to her. She's not lucid today. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow became a weapon he wielded with surgical precision. Tomorrow she'd be stronger. Tomorrow she'd be able to visit. Tomorrow stretched into weeks of dying hope. Then came the call I'd dreaded. Not David this time, but a hospice nurse. Mr. Fitzgerald, your mother is asking for you. It won't be long. Is there any way you can come? I begged. I literally got on my knees in the warden's office. A grown man crying for the chance to hold his mother's hand one last time. He made calls, pulled strings, and got me a supervised medical visit 8 hours, shackled with 2 guards. But David had one more card to play. The night before the visit, an anonymous tip claimed I was planning to escape during transport. The visit was cancelled pending investigation. By the time they determined the tip was false, it was too late. Mum died on a Thursday morning while I was teaching my GED class. I didn't know until evening count, when the chaplain pulled me aside. She'd been alone except for David, who'd apparently held her hand and promised to take care of everything. They gave me 5 minutes on the phone with him. She went peacefully, he said, voice carefully modulated. Her last words were about her boys, how proud she was of both of us. I told her you loved her, you son of a bitch. The words came out raw, primal. You kept me from her. You stole everything, my freedom, my life, and now my chance to say goodbye. Marcus, I know you're grieving, but these delusions one day, David, one day, the truth will come out. And when it does, I hope you remember standing by her deathbed, lying to her with your last breath. I hung up before he could respond. They denied my request to attend the funeral. Security risk, they said. David sent photos afterward the church, packed with his colleagues, the elaborate flowers, the headstone that read beloved mother of David with my name, added, like an afterthought, in smaller text below. That night, Big Country found me standing at our cell window, staring at nothing. You okay? She died thinking I was guilty. Died believing David's lies. That's what kills me, not the cancer, not missing the funeral, but that she went to her grave thinking her oldest son was a violent criminal. Maybe she knew more than you think, Country said softly. Mothers, They got instincts. Maybe she saw through it all, but loved you both too much to choose sides. I wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. But all I had were David's filtered words, and the knowledge that my brother had stolen even my mother's death from me, turned it into another scene in his performance as the dutiful son. The grief transformed into something harder, colder. David had taken everything that mattered, but he'd also made a mistake. In his cruelty, he'd freed me from my last restraint. I no longer had to protect Mum from the truth about her golden boy. Now, there was just justice. And time. I had plenty of both. 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days into my sentence. Salvation arrived in an envelope bearing the logo of the Innocence Project. I'd written to them so many times, I'd memorized their rejection language, so I almost threw it away unopened. But something made me pause. The envelope was thicker than usual. Dear Mr. Fitzgerald, after extensive review, we've decided to accept your case for full investigation. New developments in prosecutorial misconduct law, combined with the pattern evidence you've documented, warrant a comprehensive review. Your new attorney, Sarah Williams, will contact you within the week. I read it 5 times before the words sank in. Big Country found me sitting on my bunk, letter trembling in my hands. Good news, they're taking my case. The Innocence Project is actually taking my case. He grinned, a rare sight on his weathered face. About damn time somebody listened. Sarah Williams was everything my public defender hadn't been sharp, prepared, and genuinely outraged by what she found in my files. Our first meeting lasted for hours, with her asking questions that cut straight to the heart of David's scheme. Your documentation is impressive, she said, reviewing my handwritten charts, but pattern evidence isn't enough. We need something concrete from your specific case. You mentioned security footage that was destroyed, supposedly routine purging, but the store owner told me they were supposed to keep it for 10 years. Her eyes sharpened. He told you this when, during transport to a medical appointment, about 2 years ago, we were at a red light near his store. He recognized me, started screaming about getting his justice, said he'd kept copies of everything, that the insurance company required it. Marcus. Sarah leaned forward. Are you telling me there might be unaltered security footage out there? If David didn't get to it first. She was already packing her files. I'll have our investigator on it today. What else haven't you told me? We spent the next 3 months building the case properly. Sarah's team interviewed witnesses I'd only dreamed of reaching. They found Carl Brennan's sister, who revealed that Carl had suddenly paid off his debts right after finding my lanyard. They tracked down former employees from the DA's office who'd noticed David's unusual behavior around my case. But the real breakthrough came from technology. Digital forensics, Sarah explained during a visit that had me gripping the table. Your brother made a critical error. He used his work computer to access gambling sites, and it keeps logs going back a decade. We found proof of his debts, Marcus. $50,000 owed to some very dangerous people, paid off 1 week after. Your conviction? 50,000. The exact amount stolen from Goldstein's. We also found something else. Deleted emails between David and an unknown account, discussing the situation and making sure everything stays buried. The metadata shows they were sent during your trial. For the first time in 7 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Sarah filed a motion for new trial based on newly discovered evidence. The DA's office, now under new leadership, agreed to review the case. David had moved on to private practice after being passed over for a judgeship. Apparently, someone high up had concerns about his conviction rate being too perfect. The hearing was set for October. I'd appear via video link, but Sarah would be there in person, along with investigators and expert witnesses. She warned me not to get too optimistic motions, for new trials were rarely granted, but I could see the excitement in her eyes. 2 weeks before the hearing, another miracle. Mr. Goldstein wanted to meet with Sarah. He's having doubts, she told me after. Says he's been having nightmares about identifying the wrong man. The trauma affected his memory more than he admitted. He's willing to testify that his identification might have been influenced by the prosecution's presentation. The pieces were falling into place, but David wasn't going down without a fight. Sarah started receiving anonymous threats. Her car tires were slashed. A private investigator was caught trying to access her garbage. He's panicking, she said. Good. Panicked people make mistakes. The mistake came in the form of Thomas Brennan, not Carl, the witness, but his cousin, who'd been in county lockup with a man named Eddie Torino during my trial. Eddie was doing life for murder, but he'd kept a journal, documenting everything he heard inside, including a confession. This guy, Tommy Brennan, he was bragging about a jewelry heist. Eddie told Sarah's investigator, said his cousin Carl got paid to plant evidence that the whole thing was set up by some prosecutor who owed money to the same people Tommy worked for. Said the prosecutor's brother took the fall, but Tommy did the crime. Thomas Brennan had died in a prison riot 2 years ago, but Eddie had kept the journal. Names, dates, details that only the real robber would know. Details that had never been made public. It's hearsay, Sarah warned, but combined with everything else, it paints a picture no judge can ignore. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Patricia Chen, David's ex-fiancée. She'd kept quiet for years, but news of the investigation loosened her tongue. I found betting slips in his apartment, she told Sarah. Thousands of dollars in debts. When I confronted him, he said he had a plan to fix everything. A week later, Marcus was arrested. David paid off everything with what he called a bonus, but I knew something was wrong. That's why I left him. We had it all: motive, opportunity, witnesses, digital evidence, and a documented pattern of corruption. David had built his career on my destruction, but that foundation was finally cracking. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Big Country sat up with me, playing endless games of chess while I talked through every possible outcome. What if the judge doesn't believe it? What if David finds a way to spin it? Then you keep fighting. But Marcus, look at what you've built. 7 years ago, you were a chemistry teacher who didn't know a motion from a brief. Now you've got the Innocence Project calling you a model of self-advocacy. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won something. He was right, but I wanted more than moral victory. I wanted my name cleared. I wanted David exposed. I wanted justice, not just for me, but for every life he'd destroyed. As dawn broke through our barred window, I prepared for the most important day of my life. 7 years of preparation, documentation, and desperate hope had led to this moment. David thought he'd buried me forever. Tomorrow, we'd see who was really 6 feet under. The morning of my release felt surreal. 10 years, minus time served and good behavior, had brought me to this moment. The new trial motion had succeeded beyond our wildest hopes. Not only had the judge granted it, but the DA's office had declined to retry the case. The combination of Thomas Brennan's posthumous confession, the digital evidence of David's gambling debts, and Mr. Goldstein's recanted identification had made their case evaporate. Fitzgerald, 30,847. The guard's voice echoed down the tier one last time. Pack your shit, you're going home. Big Country helped me box up my legal files. Thousands of pages representing a decade of fighting for this moment. He'd been my protector, my friend, my anchor to sanity in this concrete hell. You did it, Professor, he said, using the nickname the younger inmates had given me. You beat them at their own game. We did it, I corrected. I couldn't have survived without you. He shrugged off the emotion. Just remember us when you're back out there changing the world. And Marcus, don't let that anger eat you alive. You're free now. Be free. Processing out was the reverse of coming in, trading blues for the civilian clothes Sarah had brought, receiving my few possessions in a paper bag, signing forms that acknowledged my debt to society was paid, except it had never been my debt. I walked through the gates at 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning in April. No family waiting, no celebration, just Sarah Williams and her beat-up Honda, ready to drive me to a halfway house and the strange new reality of freedom. How does it feel? She asked, as the prison disappeared in the rearview mirror. Like I'm still dreaming. Like any second, a guard's going to wake me for count. The world had changed in a decade. Everyone had smartphones now, staring at screens instead of each other. Buildings I remembered were gone, replaced by chain stores and coffee shops. Music I didn't recognize played from car speakers. I was Rip Van Winkle waking to an alien landscape. The halfway house was in a rough neighborhood, but it felt like a palazzo door I could close, a window without bars, the ability to walk outside whenever I wanted. That first night, I stood on the narrow balcony for hours, just breathing free air. Sarah had arranged for me to receive the standard exoneration settlement, though it wouldn't come through for months. In the meantime, I had $200, gate money, and a world that had moved on without me. My teaching license was revoked to formality, since no school would hire an ex-con, exonerated or not. My apartment was long gone, my possessions sold or thrown away. I was 47 years old, starting from less than zero. But I had something David hadn't counted on: purpose. The first week was about survival, learning to use a smartphone, applying for jobs that didn't care about the decade gap in my resume, adjusting to the overwhelming freedom of choice. The grocery store paralyzed me. 20 types of bread, 50 cereals. I stood in the aisle crying, overwhelmed by options after years of no choices at all. The second week, I started rebuilding. I found work at a warehouse, loading trucks for minimum wage. My supervisor was younger than some of my former students, but I kept my head down and worked. Honest work for honest pay, something I'd dreamed about in my cell. Mum's house had been sold to pay her medical bills, but I made a pilgrimage to the neighborhood. The new owners had painted it yellow, Mum's least favorite color. I stood on the sidewalk, remembering Sunday dinners, holiday mornings, the life we'd had before David's ambition poisoned everything. David himself had disappeared. After the new trial was granted and the evidence became public, he'd resigned from his firm, citing personal reasons. Some said he'd left the state. Others whispered about bar investigations, potential criminal charges. I didn't care where he was, as long as it was away from the justice system he'd corrupted. Week 3 brought unexpected visitors. Roberto Sanchez, the man Janet Morrison had died trying to save, found me at the halfway house. He'd been released after David's other cases came under review. "You saved my life," he said, gripping my hand. "Your investigation, your persistence, it freed 8 of us. We owe you everything. You owe me nothing." We were all victims of the same predator, but they insisted on helping. Roberto's cousin owned a restaurant and offered me evening shifts. Another exonerated man had started a moving company and needed reliable workers. Slowly, a network formed, David, victims becoming each other's support system. 6 weeks into freedom, I finally opened the letter Mum had hidden, the one I'd found at her funeral. David had tried to take it, but I'd pocketed it before he could. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "My dearest Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're free. I knew, my darling boy, a mother always knows. I saw David's darkness early but loved him anyway, hoping love could fix what was broken inside him. I failed him, and that failure cost you everything. I was too weak to stand up to him in life, but I left you something in death. Check with Hamilton and Associates. Law firm. I may not have been brave, but I was thorough. All my love, Mum. The lawyers had been waiting for me. Mum had hired a private investigator with her life insurance money, documenting David's activities, gathering evidence. She'd known for years, but felt trapped between her sons. The files were extensive photographs, financial records, witness statements she'd collected quietly while playing the grieving mother of a convicted felon. She specifically instructed us to hold these until you were exonerated, the lawyer explained. She had enormous faith that day would come. I sat in that sterile law office, reading my mother's secret investigation, and wept for the woman who had loved us both too much to choose sides, until death freed her from that impossible position. 3 months after release, I was finding my rhythm. Work, meetings with other exonerees, letters to inmates still fighting for freedom. I'd started speaking at law schools about wrongful convictions, turning my pain into purpose. The nightmares came less frequently. The hypervigilance was fading. I was learning to be free. Then David resurfaced. The letter arrived at the halfway house, forwarded through his lawyer. His handwriting, once bold and confident, now showed tremors. Marcus, I know you'll never forgive me, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. The investigation is closing in. They've frozen my accounts, seized my records. It's only a matter of time. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry I became someone who could do what I did to you. Prison changes people, you said once. I guess I'll find out if that's true. David, I held the letter for a long time, waiting to feel satisfaction, but all I felt was empty. David's apology meant nothing. His impending imprisonment wouldn't give me back the decade he stole. Nothing could undo what he'd done, but I could make sure it meant something. Every speech I gave, every innocent person I helped, every moment I chose hope over bitterness. That was my revenge. Living well, living freely, living with purpose, despite what he'd tried to make me become. That night, I burned David's letter and watched the ashes float away on the wind. Then I went inside and started writing letters to my students, still inside, telling them about the strange, difficult, beautiful reality of freedom 10 years he'd stolen. But the rest of my life was mine. The funeral home smelled of lilies and old grief, a combination that immediately transported me back to Dad's service 27 years ago. But this time was different. This time, I walked in, a free man, exonerated but forever marked by the decade David had stolen from me. The mahogany casket sat surrounded by elaborate arrangements, each tagged with cards from David's colleagues, his country club friends, people who still believed his carefully crafted image. Beloved son and distinguished prosecutor, the memorial program proclaimed, as if his crimes could be buried with Mum's body. I stood in the receiving line, watching relatives I hadn't seen in a decade process their shock. Some embraced me tearfully, whispering apologies for believing the worst. Others kept their distance, unsure how to treat the formerly convicted nephew who'd been proven innocent. Aunt Sandra clutched my hands, mascara streaming. We should have known, should have questioned it. You were always such a good boy. But they hadn't known, hadn't questioned, had been all too ready to believe David's narrative of the failed older brother finally showing his true colors. I accepted their condolences with hollow grace, saving my energy for what was coming. David arrived late, of course. Even at our mother's funeral, he had to make an entrance. He looked older, grayer, the past months of investigation wearing on him. His tailored suit couldn't hide the weight loss, the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. When he saw me, he froze. We hadn't been in the same room since the trial. For a moment, nobody else existed. Just two brothers separated by an ocean of betrayal. Marcus, he approached slowly, as if I might attack. Thank you for coming. Mom would have wanted, don't. My voice was quiet, but carried enough ice to stop him mid-sentence. Don't you dare tell me what Mum would have wanted. The room had gone silent, relatives sensing the tension. David's jaw tightened, the prosecutor in him rising to the surface. This isn't the time or place, you're right. The time was 10 years ago when you planted evidence. The place was the courtroom where you committed perjury. But here we are. He glanced around at our audience, calculating damage control. Then, with the same smooth motion I'd seen him use to approach hostile witnesses, he moved closer and lowered his voice. You got your freedom, your settlement. What more do you want? The truth, out loud, for everyone to hear. His composure cracked slightly. You know I can't the investigation. My lawyer says. Your lawyer. I laughed, the sound harsh in the funeral quiet. Did you have a good lawyer, David? Better than the public defender you steamrolled. Must be nice, affording quality representation. That's, when he said it, the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. You know, Marcus, guilty people always claim innocence. Maybe prison taught you to finally own your mistakes. The same words. The exact same words he'd said that day, standing by Mum's casket, like he'd rehearsed them, practiced his delivery for maximum impact. The cruelty of it, the calculated callousness, took my breath away. Guilty people, I repeated slowly, like Thomas Brennan. He claimed innocence right up until he confessed to robbing Goldsteins. Or did you miss that development while shopping for defense attorneys? His face had gone pale, but he forced that practiced smile. I don't know what you're talking about. No, let me refresh your memory. Tommy Brennan, small-time thief, owed money to the same people you did. Funny coincidence, him confessing to the crime I served time for. Even funnier that his cousin Carl found my conveniently dropped lanyard. You're delusional. Grief does strange things. So does DNA evidence. I pulled out my phone, showing him the email from Sarah. We got the results yesterday. That blood on the jewelry store counter, the one the prosecution said was too degraded to test. Turns out modern technology is amazing. Thomas Brennan's DNA, not mine. David stepped back as if I'd struck him. Around us, relatives were openly staring, some recording on their phones. The Golden Sun's facade was cracking in real time. You destroyed my life, I continued, voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Sent me to prison for your gambling debts. Let me rot while you built your career on my suffering. And the worst part, you let Mom die believing I was guilty. That's not Ty never meant. He was scrambling now, the smooth prosecutor reduced to stammering. It got out of control. I just needed what? Money, success, to prove you were the better son. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The people I owed, they would have killed me. I just needed time, and then the opportunity presented itself. And I thought you thought I was expendable. The disappointing older brother nobody would miss. I was going to fix it. The words exploded from him, too loud for the funeral home. After a few years, new evidence would surface. You'd get out, get a settlement. I'd make sure you were taken care of. But then you started fighting, investigating, making waves. I had to protect myself. There it was. Not quite a full confession, but close enough. I glanced around, noting several phones still recording. Let him try to spin this. Janet Morrison is dead because she tried to tell the truth. Roberto Sanchez lost 3 years of his life. 8 other innocent people went to prison for your ambition. And Mum, my voice broke. Mum knew. She knew, and it killed her, having to choose between her sons. David's carefully maintained mask finally shattered completely. I didn't mean for anyone to die. Janet's accident, I swear, I had nothing to do with that. And Mum, God, Marcus. I held her hand while she died, and all she talked about was you. How proud she was of her teacher's son. How she knew you'd prove everyone wrong someday. Don't. The word came out ragged. Don't you dare use her last words as a weapon. I'm going to prison. He said it, matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. The FBI has everything. My lawyer says 5 to 10 if I cooperate, 15 to 20 if I fight. Either way, I'm finished. Good. He flinched at my coldness. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I am sorry. Not just for getting caught for all of it. For becoming someone who could do that to his own brother. You're right. It doesn't mean anything. We stood there, two brothers at their mother's funeral, separated by more than just the years and bars between us. The relatives had given us space, but I could feel their shock, their hunger for drama, even in grief. I should go, David said finally. This is your moment with Mum. You deserve that much. He turned to leave, but I caught his arm. David, one question. Why me? Really, why? Not the gambling debts or the opportunity. Why was it so easy for you to destroy me? He looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time in years. Because you were everything I wasn't. Kind, honest, content with simple things. You chose to teach kids when you could have made millions in biotech. Chose to take care of Mum when I was too busy becoming important. And every time I looked at you, I saw the person I should have been. It was easier to destroy that mirror than look at what I'd become. With that, he walked away. The last time I'd see my brother free, I returned to Mum's casket, placing my hand on the polished wood. Around me, the funeral resumed its awkward rhythm, but I barely noticed. I'd gotten my confession, my closure of sorts. But Big Country had been revenged, tasted like ashes. I'm free, Mom, I whispered. He admitted it. Everyone knows now. I just wish you could have seen it. But maybe she had. Maybe that's why. She'd hired the investigator, gathered evidence, planted seeds that would bloom into my exoneration. Maybe her final gift wasn't just the truth, but the chance for both her sons to face who they really were. I stayed until everyone else had gone, sitting in the empty funeral home with my mother's body and my brother's confession echoing in the silence. Tomorrow, there would be lawyers and statements and the machinery of justice grinding forward. But tonight, there was just grief for the mother we'd lost, the brother David had chosen not to be, and the decade I'd never get back. The mathematics of loss, unsolvable and absolute. When I finally left, the funeral director handed me an envelope. Your mother left instructions, said to give this to you after the service. Inside was a photo David and me as kids, arms around each other, gap-toothed grins, innocent of what we'd become. On the back, in Mum's shaky handwriting, remember when you loved each other. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for you. I tucked the photo in my pocket and walked out into the night, carrying my mother's last wish like a stone in my chest. Forgiveness. After everything, she still believed in impossible things. Maybe that's what mothers do. Catherine Torres sat across from me in the diner booth, her former FBI credentials evident in the way she catalogued every person who entered, every exit route, every potential threat. I'd hired her with part of my settlement money, needing someone, with the skills and connections to dig where I couldn't. Your brother was smart, she said, sliding a thick folder across the table, but not as smart as he thought. Criminal lawyers make terrible criminals. They overthink, leave patterns, create unnecessary complexity. I opened the folder, my coffee growing cold as I absorbed what she'd found. Financial records stretching back years, showing David's spiral into gambling addiction. Casino surveillance footage of him at high-stakes tables, sweating through his shirt as he lost hand after hand. Loan documents from increasingly dangerous sources. The robbery was planned weeks in advance. Catherine continued, but not by David. Thomas Brennan was going to hit Goldstein's regardless. It was his specialty. High-end jewelry stores with older owners. Your brother just saw an opportunity to frame me, to solve multiple problems at once. Look at this. She pointed to a highlighted section. 3 days before the robbery, David accessed your personnel file at the school district, downloaded your photo, your schedule, everything. Then he met with Brennan. The meeting had taken place in a parking garage, captured on security cameras. Catherine had somehow accessed. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. David handing something to Brennan. Their body language suggesting negotiation rather than confrontation. Best guess. David provided inside information about the store in exchange for Brennan matching your general description during the robbery. Wear similar clothes, adopt your posture. Brennan was a pro. He'd done it before, throwing suspicion on innocent people. And my lanyard. David lifted it during a family dinner. Your mother mentioned it in her notes. You'd been complaining about losing your ID, having to pay for a replacement. She thought it was strange David had been in your room that night, said he was looking for aspirin. Each detail was another brick in the wall of David's guilt. Catherine had interviewed dozens of people, tracked down witnesses the original investigation had ignored, built a timeline that showed the methodical destruction of my life. Here's where it gets interesting, she said, producing another set of documents, the $50,000 David owed. It wasn't just gambling. He'd been skimming from client trust accounts. Small amounts he thought nobody would notice, but the state bar was starting an audit. So he was desperate and cornered. The robbery netted exactly what he needed to cover the shortfall and pay off the casino debts. But Thomas Brennan got greedy, wanted more money to stay quiet about David's involvement. That's when your brother decided to ensure Brennan took the fall. Anonymously tipped off Brennan's location to a rival crew. The prison riot that killed him wasn't random. My stomach turned. David had him murdered. Orchestrated circumstances. That made it likely. Plausible deniability. But the result was the same. Brennan couldn't testify about the real story if he was dead. The depth of David's corruption was staggering. It hadn't been a momentary lapse or a desperate mistake. It had been a calculated campaign of destruction, with contingencies for every threat, including murdering his co-conspirator. What about the other cases? The pattern Sarah found. Catherine's expression darkened. That's where your brother went, from desperate to predatory. After your conviction, he realized he had a formula. Find someone in debt to dangerous people, offer them a deal frame, an innocent person with a record or addiction issues. Split the proceeds of whatever crime they committed. She showed me case after case. A drug dealer who'd robbed a pharmacy, pinning it on a recovering addict. A gang member who'd committed assault, with a homeless veteran taking the fall. Each time, David prosecuted the innocent party, while his real partners walked away with reduced charges or mysterious case dismissals. 8 confirmed cases over 6 years. Always the same pattern: vulnerable defendants, overwhelming evidence that appeared suddenly, witnesses who were either coached or coerced. Your brother built his reputation on false convictions. How did nobody notice? Because he was careful about target selection. People with records, addiction issues, mental health problems, defendants who fit the crime, who juries would believe were guilty. And he was the golden boy, youngest prosecutor, perfect conviction rate. Nobody wanted to look too closely at his success, but someone finally had. Catherine had found the FBI investigation file, started 2 years before my exoneration. An analyst had noticed statistical anomalies in David's cases, too many convenient evidence discoveries, too many witnesses with sudden memory improvements, too many defendants with ironclad alibis that mysteriously fell apart. They were building a RICO case, she explained. Your brother wasn't working alone by the end. He had a network of cops who'd plant evidence, prison informants who'd manufacture confessions, Even a judge who'd ensure certain cases went to trial despite weak evidence. Judge Harrison, David's mentor, currently under federal investigation. Your exoneration broke the dam suddenly. Everyone wanted to distance themselves from David Fitzgerald. We've got 3 cops who flipped to former ADAS providing testimony, and enough documentary evidence to bury your brother for decades. I studied the evidence, seeing David's systematic corruption laid out like a disease spreading through the justice system. But one thing bothered me. Why keep going after my case? He'd cleared his debts. Why continue? Catherine leaned back, considering. Power, addiction, maybe guilt. Once you've crossed that line, it's easier to keep crossing it than face what you've done. Or maybe he was trying to prove something. Prove what? That he was the superior brother. Every conviction added to his reputation while you rotted in prison. He wasn't just stealing your freedom, he was stealing what he thought should have been his life. The respect, the moral authority, the purpose you found in teaching. It made 6 sense. David had always measured himself against me, found himself wanting in ways that mattered. So he'd destroyed me and tried to take my place as the good son, the one who helped others. Except his help came in the form of false justice, building his career on the suffering of innocence. There's one more thing, Catherine said quietly. Janet Morrison's death. I had a friend in highway patrol pulled the accident report. No skid marks, no mechanical failure, but her phone records show 17 calls from an unknown number in the hour before she died. The same number appeared in David's call logs, routed through a burner phone. He killed her. He terrified her into killing herself. Subtle difference. Legally, but the same result. She was going to recant her testimony, and he couldn't allow it. The full weight of David's crimes settled over me. It wasn't just my life he'd destroyed. Janet Morrison, Thomas Brennan, 8 innocent defendants. Countless family members left wondering why their loved ones had suddenly become criminals. All for his ambition, his addiction, his inability to accept being second best at anything. What happens now? I asked. The FBI raids his home and office tomorrow morning. They wanted me to ask, will you testify before the grand jury? Your testimony could ensure he never sees freedom again. I thought about Big Country's advice about letting go of anger, about Mum's note urging forgiveness, about the decade I'd lost and could never recover. Yes, I said simply. He needs to face what he's done. All of it. Catherine nodded, gathering her files. For what it's worth, Mr. Fitzgerald, I've investigated a lot of criminals. Your brother is one of the worst, not because of the scale of his crimes, but because he perverted the very system meant to protect people. He turned justice into a weapon. After she left, I sat in that diner booth for hours, processing the magnitude of David's betrayal. He hadn't just framed me, he'd built an empire of lies, destroying lives for profit and pride. The little brother I'd protected, supported, and loved had become a monster in a tailored suit. But knowing the full truth, seeing the evidence laid out in black and white, gave me something I hadn't expected. Peace. It wasn't my fault. Nothing I could have done would have prevented this. David had chosen his path long before he'd chosen me as his first victim. Tomorrow, the raids would begin. The headlines would scream about corruption in the DA's office. David's victims would finally have hope for justice. And I would testify, not for revenge, but for truth. Because that's what teachers do. We shine light in dark places, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The DNA results arrived on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by Sarah Williams with an expression that told me everything before she spoke. We got it, Marcus. Irrefutable proof. I held the report with trembling hands, reading the technical language that translated to freedom. The blood on the jewelry store counter, previously dismissed as too degraded for testing, had yielded results under new technology. Thomas Michael Brennan, deceased. Probability of match, 99.97%. But there's more, Sarah continued, producing additional documents. Remember how the prosecution claimed there was no DNA evidence on the stolen jewelry recovered from pawn shops? They lied. 3 pieces tested positive for DNA, Brennan's, not yours. David knew he had 2. The lab reports were in his files, buried under hundreds of pages of irrelevant documents. He deliberately withheld exculpatory evidence. Brady violation. The magic words that could overturn any conviction. But this went beyond legal technicalities. This was proof that David had knowingly sent me to prison for another man's crime. Sarah spread more papers across my kitchen table, each one another nail in David's coffin. Catherine Torres's investigation triggered something amazing. People started coming forward. Look at this. A deathbed confession from Thomas Brennan, dictated to a prison chaplain 2 days before the riot that killed him. I robbed Goldstein's jewelry, made a deal with prosecutor to frame his brother. He said the guy was guilty of other stuff anyway, that I was doing society a favor. Paid me 10 grand and promised reduced time on my other charges. But he lied, set me up to die in here. Tell Marcus Fitzgerald I'm sorry. The chaplain had this for 2 years, filed away in prison records. Nobody thought to look until now. But Marcus, this next part, you might want to sit down. I was already sitting, but I gripped the table harder. Sarah produced a USB drive. Security footage from the pawn shop where the jewelry was sold. The original was supposedly lost, but the shop owner made a backup for insurance. He forgot about it until the FBI came calling. We watched on a laptop. Clear as day. Thomas Brennan selling pieces from the robbery. But he wasn't alone. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured, but unmistakable, stood David, my brother, watching his accomplice fence the stolen goods. The timestamp is 3 days after your arrest, Sarah said quietly. While you were in county jail, David was helping dispose of evidence. The room spun. It was one thing to know David had framed me, another to see him actively participating in the crime. He hadn't just manipulated evidence, he'd been an accessory after the fact. There's audio too, enhanced by the FBI tech team. David's voice, distorted but recognizable. Make sure nothing traces back. My brother's prints need to stay clean. Can't have secondary evidence confusing the jury. Brennan's response, you sure he'll go down for this? I'll make sure of it. Just stick to our story. I stood abruptly, needing air, needing space from the suffocating truth. Sarah followed me onto the small balcony. I know this is overwhelming. I laughed bitterly. My brother didn't just frame me. He was part of the robbery. He planned it, profited from it, then sent me to prison for it. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it. The FBI wants to know if you've remembered anything else, any conversations with David that might corroborate this evidence. Memories flooded back, recontextualized by what I now knew. David asking detailed questions about my schedule weeks before the robbery. His sudden interest in my teaching routine. Which students stayed late when I'd be home alone. I'd thought he was finally taking interest in my career. He interviewed me, I realized. Gathered intelligence for the frame. Asked about my finances. If I was dating anyone who could alibi me. I thought we were reconnecting. Sarah took notes. As I talked, each memory another piece of evidence. The family dinner where my lanyard went missing. David had spilled wine on my shirt. Insisted on helping me change. The way he'd pushed Mum to have the meal on a Tuesday, knowing I'd have papers to grade afterward, ensuring I'd be alone that night. He choreographed everything, I said. Every detail planned to destroy my alibi and create opportunity. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. David's ex-fiancée, Patricia, had kept everything. Love letters where David fantasized about wealth and power, emails discussing his gambling debts, and a journal entry that chilled me. Sometimes I think Marcus has it all figured out. Simple job, no ambition beyond helping kids, content with mediocrity, but he's happy, and I'm drowning. Maybe if positions were reversed, if I had his contentment and he had my drive. Or better yet, if he was gone and I could be the only son, the successful one without comparison. Written 2 months before the robbery. Premeditation, Sarah said simply. This proves he'd been thinking about eliminating you for months. The evidence kept coming. Bank records showing David's deposits matching the robbery timeline. Phone records placing him in communication with Brennan for weeks before the crime. Even DNA David's hair found in Brennan's car, explained away at the time as cross-contamination from the investigation. How did nobody see this? I asked. How did an entire DA's office miss this corruption? They didn't want to see it. David had the highest conviction rate in the state. He was their star, their future. Asking questions would have threatened everyone's career. But one person had seen it. Mum, her private investigator, had uncovered much of this before her death. But she'd been too sick, too conflicted to act. Her files, delivered by the law firm, confirmed what the FBI had found independently. She knew her son was a monster, I said, reading her notes. But she couldn't turn him in. So she documented everything, hoping someday justice would find its own way. The final piece of evidence was the most personal. Hidden in Mum's files was a recording made on her phone during one of David's visits to her hospital room. Her voice was weak but clear. David, I need to know. Did you hurt Marcus? Did you put him in that place? A long pause, then David's voice, thinking his mother was too medicated to remember. It was complicated, Mom. Marcus was in the way of everything I needed to become. But don't worry about that now. Just rest. My boys, Mum whispered. My poor boys. What have we all become? The recording ended with David adjusting her medication. The sound of increased morphine dripped clear. On the audio, he'd sedated her to stop her questions. Another small cruelty in his catalogue of betrayals. Sarah gathered all the evidence into neat piles. The grand jury convenes next week. With all this, David's looking at 25 to life. RICO charges, murder, conspiracy for Brennan, multiple counts of false imprisonment for his victims, obstruction of justice, Brady violations, the list goes on. Will he take a plea? Would you? I thought about it. David, faced with the same choice he'd given me, admit guilt or fight hopelessly against overwhelming evidence. The irony was perfect. No, I decided, he'll fight. He's incapable of admitting fault, even now. He'll claim conspiracy, mental illness, anything but accepting responsibility. Then we'll bury him with truth, Sarah said simply. Every document, every recording, every piece of DNA evidence will be presented. His victims will testify. You'll testify. And when it's done, David Fitzgerald will be just another number in the system he corrupted. That night, I sat surrounded by evidence of my brother's crimes, trying to reconcile the David I'd grown up with and the monster he'd become. But maybe that was the point. There was no reconciliation possible. People made choices, and David had chosen himself over everyone else, every time. The DNA evidence was just science, proving what I'd always known in my heart. But having proof, holding it in my hands, made it real in a way that 10 years of suspicion hadn't. David had stolen a decade of my life. Now, science would steal the rest of his bear. There was justice in that, cold and clinical as any equation I'd ever taught. The evidence didn't lie. Unlike my brother, it told only truth. I arranged to meet David at our childhood home, now owned by strangers but familiar in every line and shadow. The new owners were away, and I'd gotten permission to visit the backyard where we'd played as kids. It seemed fitting ending where it all began. He arrived 15 minutes late, looking haggard in an expensive suit, that no longer fit properly. The stress of the investigation had carved lines into his face, turned his hair prematurely grey. He looked like Dad in his final days, desperate, haunted, caught. Marcus. He stood by the old oak tree where we'd built a fort 35 years ago. I got your message. Why here? Neutral ground. I pulled the small recording device from my pocket, showing it to him. And I want this conversation on record. No more lies, no more games, just truth. His laugh was bitter. Truth from a lawyer that's rich, from a brother, or what's left of one. We faced each other across the yard where we'd once played cops and robbers. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Ask your questions, David said finally. I know you. Have them. Why? The word came out raw. Just why? He loosened his tie, the polished prosecutor facade cracking. Which why? Why did I frame you? Why did I keep going? Why did I throw away everything for money I spent in 6 months? All of it. Make me understand how my little brother became this. David sat on the rusted swing set, looking absurdly formal. In his suit. You want a villain origin story? Sorry to disappoint. No tragic backstory. No moment of Breaking Bad. Just choices, Marcus. Small ones at first. The gambling. Started in law school. Stress relief, I told myself. But winning felt like validation. Losing felt like a challenge. Before I knew it, I owed more than I could ever repay on a prosecutor's salary. So you decided to destroy me? No, the word exploded from him. That was never. I was going to rob Goldstein's myself. Had it all planned. Then Brennan approached me. He'd heard through connections that I needed money. Offered to do it for a cut of the insurance information. And framing me. David's hands clenched and unclenched. That was opportunistic. Brennan needed a fall guy to throw off investigation. I knew your schedule, your habits. It was supposed to be temporary muddy. The waters create reasonable doubt. You'd be questioned and released. But you made sure I wasn't released. Things spiraled. Goldstein's identification was stronger than expected. The planted evidence worked too well. And then he paused, meeting my eyes. Then I realized I could win, build my reputation on the case, solve all my problems at once, by sacrificing your brother, by sacrificing someone who was already everything I couldn't be. The admission ripped from him like shrapnel. Do you know what it's like, growing up in your shadow? St. Marcus, the teacher. Marcus who gave up college to support the family. Marcus who never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. So you hated me for being decent. I hated myself for not being you. And eventually, that hate needed somewhere to go. I let the recorder capture his confession, fighting the urge to rage, to attack, to make him feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But I needed more than emotional satisfaction. I needed answers. Tell me about Thomas Brennan's death. David's face went pale. I didn't. Don't lie. Not now. Not after everything. He aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He was blackmailing me. Wanted more money. Threatened to confess. I may have mentioned to certain people that he was planning to snitch on their operations too. What happened after that wasn't my direct action. You had him murdered. I had him silenced. There's a legal distinction. There's no distinction for the dead. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the creak of old swing chains. Finally, I asked the question that haunted me most. Janet Morrison. Did you kill her? No, but his voice wavered. I pressured her, made it clear what would happen if she recanted. Her death was her choice. Her death was murder. You just used fear as your weapon instead of a gun. David stood abruptly, pacing the yard like the caged animal he'd soon literally be. You want me to say I'm sorry? Fine, I'm sorry. You want me to take responsibility? I'm drowning in it. But you got out. Marcus, you're free. You won. Why does the why matter now? Because I need to understand how my brother became a monster. How the kid I taught to ride a bike in this yard became someone who could destroy lives without losing sleep. You think I didn't lose sleep? His voice cracked. You think I didn't see your face every time I closed my eyes? But I was in too deep. After your conviction, people came to me. Others who needed similar solutions. And I was good at it. Too good. 8 innocent people. David. 8 lives destroyed. 12, actually. The FBI missed a few. He said it so casually, confessing to additional crimes, like discussing the weather, plus peripheral damage, families, friends, communities that lost people to prison. The ripple effects of my choices. I studied this stranger wearing my brother's face. Do you feel anything? Guilt? Remorse? Or are we all just collateral damage in your success story? I feel everything. He whirled on me, tears streaming down his face. I feel it every second of every day. But feeling doesn't change anything. I can't undo what I've done. Can't give you back 10 years, or bring Janet back to life, or restore faith in a system I corrupted. All I can do is face what's coming, which is life without parole, probably, unless the death penalty's on the table for Brennan. My lawyers are negotiating, but, he shrugged. Orange is going to be my new black. The attempt at humor fell flat. We stood there, brothers, separated by more than just crimes and years, but by fundamental choices about who we'd decided to be. I have one more question, I said. If you could do it over, would you make different choices? David considered for a long moment. Yes, I'd have been smarter, left less evidence, chosen victims who couldn't fight back as hard as you did. The honesty was chilling. Even now, facing justice, he regretted getting caught more than committing crimes. That's why you'll never understand, I told him. You think this was about intelligence, about strategy, but it was about humanity. You traded yours for temporary solutions to self-made problems. Spare me the teacher wisdom, Marcus. We both know how this ends. You testify, I go to prison. You write a book about surviving injustice. Maybe they'll make a movie crusading teacher defeats corrupt prosecutor. You'll be the hero you always wanted to be. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to be your brother. That stopped him. Cold. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he'd been scared, desperate for approval, always measuring himself against standards he'd created in his own mind. Yeah, well, he said quietly, want in one hand, shit in the other. See which fills. Up first, Dad's saying. Even now, even after everything, we were still our father's sons, one who'd inherited his addiction, another who'd inherited his work ethic. Different lessons from the same broken teacher. The FBI will arrest you tomorrow morning, I said, giving him what warning I could. 6 a.m. They'll come to your apartment, not the office. Less media that way. His eyebrows rose, giving me a heads up. So I can run. So you can face it with dignity. So you can call whoever needs calling. Arrange whatever needs arranging. So you can choose how this ends. You mean so I can choose to eat a bullet like a coward? No. The word came out sharp. So you can choose to face justice like the man Mum hoped you'd become. Show some courage for once in your life. David laughed, but it was hollow. Courage. From the man who made courage a career out of cowardice. You know what? I will face it. Not for Mum or you or any noble reason, but because I'm curious what it's like on the other side of those bars. Maybe I'll teach chemistry to inmates. Follow in your footsteps. Don't mock what you can't understand. Understanding, that's what you want. Fine. You want to understand your monster brother. I was afraid every single day from the moment I could remember. Afraid of disappointing Mum, of becoming Dad, of being second best to you. Fear made every choice for me. Fear of poverty led to gambling. Fear of violence led to framing you. Fear of discovery led to more frames, more crimes, more fear. I became a monster because I was too afraid to be anything else. The confession hung between us like smoke. In it, I heard the echo of every student I'd taught who'd made bad choices from good intentions. Every wrong turn that started with fear of failure. I was afraid to, I said quietly. Afraid in prison every day for 10 years. But fear didn't make me a monster. It made me stronger. Because you're better than me. You always were. That's the truth you wanted, right? You're the good son, the noble teacher, the wronged hero. And I'm the villain who proved everyone right about nature versus nurture. We had the same parents, same opportunities, but you chose light and I chose darkness. Case closed. That's not it is though. That's exactly what it is. He pulled out his phone, checking the time. I should go. Lawyers to call, affairs to arrange. Can't meet the FBI in yesterday's suit. He started toward the gate, then paused. For what it's worth, Nand, I know it's worth nothing. I'm glad you survived. Glad you got out. Glad you proved me wrong about everything. David, he turned back. In prison, I had a lot of time to think about forgiveness. What it means, who deserves it, whether it's for the forgiven or the forgiver. And I decided something. Hope flickered in his eyes, desperate, pathetic hope that even now I might absolve him. I decided that forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation, and some people forfeit their right to receive it. You're one of them. I don't forgive you, I never will. But I do pity you, because you'll spend the rest of your life becoming everything you claimed to hate about mere number in the system, forgotten except as a cautionary tale. The only difference is, you'll deserve it. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by something that might have been relief. Fair enough. I wouldn't forgive. Me either. He walked away then, my brother, the monster, leaving me alone in the yard where we'd once been innocent. I stood there until the sun set, recording still running, capturing the sound of wind through leaves and distant traffic and the end of everything we'd ever been to each other that night. I transcribed the recording and sent copies to Sarah, the FBI, and Catherine Torres. David's confession, freely given, would ensure he never saw freedom again. It was the last gift I could give his victims, the truth from the monster's own mouth. At exactly 6 a.m. the next morning, I watched from across the street as FBI agents led David from his building in handcuffs. He dressed in his best suit, shoes shined, hair perfectly styled. Even in defeat, he was performing, playing the role of fallen prosecutor with dignity. He saw me as they put him in the car. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance. He nodded once acknowledgement. Goodbye, ending. I didn't nod back. Some stories don't deserve closure. As the convoy pulled away, I thought about the recording device in my pocket, the confession it held, the justice it would bring. David had asked why it mattered, why I needed to understand. The answer was simple, because truth was all I had left of my brother. Not the truth of who he'd been as a child, or who he'd pretended to be as a man, but the truth of what he'd become. And that truth, horrible as it was, set us both free, him to face justice, me to finally let go. I walked away from our childhood home for the last time, leaving the ghosts of two brothers in that yard. One who'd chosen fear, one who'd chosen hope, both paying prices they never imagined, but only one walking free. The courthouse steps were swarmed with media when David was led in for arraignment. I watched from inside, having entered through a side door with Sarah. My brother, former star prosecutor, now defendant, kept his head high as cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. Mr. Fitzgerald, did you frame your brother? How many innocent people did you convict? Are you planning to plead guilty? David said nothing, his lawyer shielding him as they climbed the steps where he'd once given triumphant press conferences. The same doors that had welcomed him as a hero now admitted him as a villain. Inside the courtroom, I sat in the gallery between Roberto Sanchez and two other victims of David's frame-ups. We'd become an unlikely support group, the Fitzgerald 12, as the media had dubbed us. Bonded by shared injustice, we came to every hearing, bearing witness to the system correcting itself. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Walsh, not Judge Harrison. He'd been removed pending his own investigation. Walsh was known for her integrity and intolerance of prosecutorial misconduct. David's luck in judge assignments had finally run out. The charges were read like a medieval proclamation of sins: RICO conspiracy, 12 counts of false imprisonment, subornation of perjury, witness tampering, Brady violations, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder in the case of Thomas Brennan. Each count carried years, decades. Together, they meant David would die in prison. How does the defendant plead? David stood, his voice clear. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the gallery. Even now, even with overwhelming evidence, he couldn't admit guilt. I wasn't surprised. Was who he was, who he'd always been. The golden son who could do no wrong, even when caught red-handed. Bail was denied. Flight risk, danger to witnesses, severity of charges, all the reasons David had once used to keep innocent people locked up now applied to him. As they led him away in shackles, our eyes met briefly. He looked smaller in orange, diminished. Without his armor of expensive suits and institutional power, the trial itself took 3 months. The prosecution, led by a special prosecutor from the State Attorney General's office, was methodical in presenting David's pattern of corruption. Each victim testified, telling their story of lives destroyed by false conviction. I spent 2 days on the stand, walking through every detail of the original robbery, the frame-up, the decades stolen. Mr. Fitzgerald, the prosecutor asked, what was it like learning your own brother had orchestrated your imprisonment? Like dying, I answered honestly. Everything I believed about family, about justice, about basic human decency, all died when I learned the truth. But from that death came something else: determination, to expose him, to free others, to make sure he never destroyed another life. David's defense was predictable mental illness, gambling addiction, pressure from criminal elements. His lawyer painted him as a victim of circumstances, a good man who'd made desperate choices, but the evidence was insurmountable. Recordings, documents, witness testimony, DNA evidence, the same tools David had perverted to convict the innocent now formed an unbreakable chain around him. The most damaging testimony came from Patricia Chen, David's ex-fiancée. She brought his journal, where he'd written about his plans, his justifications, his growing addiction to the power of destroying lives. He wrote about playing God, she testified, reading from a dated entry. Today I sent another one away. The jury believed every word, just like I knew they would. Marcus taught me that people see what they expect to see. I just give them the expectation. When David finally took the stand in his own defense, it was a masterclass in narcissism. He admitted to errors in judgment, but claimed he'd been manipulated by criminals, that he'd tried to protect me by controlling the case, that everything spiraled beyond his control. You have to understand, he said, looking at the jury with practiced sincerity, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was trying to solve problems, not create them. The prosecutor's cross-examination was surgical. She walked him through each victim, each false conviction, each life destroyed. By the end, even David's mask had slipped, revealing the calculating predator beneath. Mr. Fitzgerald, you had multiple opportunities to come forward, to correct these injustices. Why didn't you? I was protecting myself. From what? From consequences. The same consequences your victims faced for crimes they didn't commit. Objection. David's lawyer called out. But the damage was done. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. As the verdicts were read guilty on all counts, David stood stoically, the performer, to the end. But I saw his hands tremble, saw the moment. Reality finally penetrated his delusions. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Walsh didn't mince words. David Fitzgerald, you have perverted the very foundation of our justice system. You took an oath to seek truth and serve justice, then violated that oath in the most egregious ways imaginable. You destroyed lives, families, and faith in our institutions. For personal gain, you transformed the law into a weapon against the innocent. This court sentences you to consecutive terms totaling 127 years without possibility of parole. You will die in prison, Mr. Fitzgerald, as your victims might have if not for your brother's persistence in seeking truth. 127 years, more than a lifetime. More than David had stolen from all his victims combined. It should have felt like victory, but all I felt was empty. After the courtroom cleared, I found myself alone with David one last time as they prepared to transport him to maximum security. His lawyer had arranged 5 minutes of goodbye neither of us wanted, but both somehow needed. So that's it, he said, chains rattling as he shifted. The teacher wins, the prosecutor loses. Mum would appreciate the irony. Mum would be heartbroken, yeah. For once, no deflection, no performance. Just acknowledgement. Marcus, can I ask you something? Not as the man who destroyed your life, but as the brother you used to push on this swing. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Teach them, he said quietly. The ones like me. The ones who think they're too smart to get caught. Too special for consequences. Teach them what I never learned, that justice isn't about winning. It's about truth. Maybe if someone had taught me that. Don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare make this about what others didn't do for you. You had every chance to choose differently. You're right. I did. And I chose wrong every single time. He stood. As the guards approached. For what it's worth, I hope your students listen better than I did. They led him away, my brother, the convict, shuffling in chains toward a cell he'd never leave. I waited until the door closed, until the sound of his shackles faded, until I was alone with the echoes of justice served. That night, the other victims and I gathered at Roberto's restaurant. We raised glasses, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement of survival, of justice delayed but not denied, of lives that would never be the same but could finally move forward. To the Fitzgerald 12, Roberto toasted, may we be the last victims of corruption in this courthouse. We drank, we shared stories, we began the process of healing that only those wrongly convicted can understand. And somewhere across the city, David began his first night of the life sentence he'd earned, not just the legal one, but the lifetime of knowing he'd become everything he'd once prosecuted. Justice, I learned, doesn't erase injustice. It doesn't return stolen years, or resurrect trust, or heal wounds cut soul deep. But it does something else, something vital. It tells the truth. And sometimes, that's enough to start building something new on the ashes of what was destroyed. 5 years after David's conviction, I stood before a classroom again, teaching chemistry to high schoolers, but criminal justice to formerly incarcerated students at the community college. The irony wasn't lost on me, or them. Professor Fitzgerald, one student asked during our first class, how do you teach justice when you know how broken it is? By teaching you to fix it, I answered. By making sure what happened to us doesn't happen to others. By turning our trauma into transformation. The Marcus Fitzgerald Center for Wrongful Conviction Advocacy had opened 2 years prior, funded by my settlement and donations from supporters who'd followed my case. We'd already helped free 3 innocent people, with dozens more cases under review. Each victory felt like reclaiming a piece of what David had stolen, not just from me, but from the very concept of justice. My phone buzzed during break, a message from Catherine Torres, now our lead investigator, another prosecutor in Michigan, showing David's pattern. 3 suspicious convictions, 1 to take a look. The work never ended. David had been a symptom of a diseased system, not the disease itself. For every corrupt prosecutor exposed, others operated in shadows, building careers on the backs of the innocent. But now they had opposition, those of us who'd survived their machinations and refused to stay silent. After class, I drove to the cemetery. Mum's grave had fresh flowers, came every week, updating her on the son who'd found purpose and the son who'd lost everything. David had written me letters from prison, dozens of them, all unopened and returned. Whatever he had to say, I wasn't ready to hear. Maybe I never would be. Your boys became who they were always going to be, I told a headstone. 1 teacher, 1 cautionary tale. I hope somewhere you're at peace with that. The evening found me at Big Country's parole hearing. He'd served 23 years of his sentence, and I was there as a character witness. Seeing him in that borrowed suit, hope and fear warring in his eyes, reminded me of my own journey from inmate to advocate. Mr. Williams protected me when I couldn't protect myself, I testified. He taught me that dignity survives even in the darkest places. He's paid his debt. Let him come home. The board granted parole. Country would be free in 30 days, with a job waiting at our center. Another small victory against a system designed for perpetual punishment rather than redemption. That night, sorting through mail at the center, I found an envelope with familiar handwriting. Not David's Roberto Sanchez's daughter, now in law. School, Mr. Fitzgerald. I wanted you to know I passed the bar exam. Starting next month, I'll be working as a public defender. You showed me that one person can make a difference, even against impossible odds. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to surrender. I promise to honor what you've taught us. I kept a file of such letters, former students who'd become counselors, children of exonerated parents who'd entered law enforcement to be the good cops, journalists dedicated to exposing corruption. David's victims had become an army of reformers, each working to ensure justice meant something more than conviction rates. Sarah Williams stopped by as I was closing up. She'd left private practice to run our legal division, finding more satisfaction in freeing the innocent than she'd ever found in billable hours. Busy day, she asked, noting my exhaustion. The good kind of busy. Country got parole. Michigan. Case looks promising, and one of our kids just passed the bar. David know about any of this? About what you've built? I shrugged. I assume he hears things. Prison gossip travels fast. But it doesn't matter what he knows. This isn't about him anymore, is it about you? I considered the question. In the beginning, maybe it had been proving I was more than David's victim, that I could rise above what he'd done. But somewhere along the way, it had become bigger than personal vindication. It's about them, I said, gesturing at the wall. Of photos, every innocent person we'd helped free, every family reunited, every life reclaimed from the system's failures. It's about making sure there are fewer thems. Sarah smiled. Speaking of which, 60 Minutes wants to do a segment on the center. 5th anniversary of David's conviction. The good that came from evil. That angle. You interested? Only if they focus on our clients, not me. I'm tired of being the wrongfully convicted brother. I want to be the teacher who helps others get free. I'll let them know. As she left, I returned to my desk, to the stack of cases waiting for review. Each file represented years stolen, lives derailed, families destroyed. The work was overwhelming, heartbreaking, necessary. My phone rang the prison. For a moment, I wondered if David had finally found a way around my refusal to accept his calls, but the voice was different. Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Chaplain Rogers. At Ashford, I have an inmate here, Jerome Patterson. Says you know him. Jeremiah, old chess partner, the one who'd told me obsession makes you sloppy. I remember Jeremiah. Is he okay? He's dying. Cancer. He asked if you could visit. Says he has something important to tell you about your brother. The wardens approved a compassionate visit, if you're willing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the past pulling me back, but Jerome had been kind when kindness was dangerous. I owed him that much. I'll be there tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into Ashford Nart, inmate 30,847, but as a free man, a teacher, an advocate. The cycle was completing itself in ways I'd never imagined. I thought about David in his own cell somewhere, serving his 127 years. Did he teach fellow inmates like I had? Did he lie awake planning appeals he'd never win? Did he ever think about the brothers we'd been before ambition and fear poisoned everything? The questions had no answers, or at least none that mattered. David had made his choices. I'd made mine. Our students would make theirs. The only difference was that mine learned that justice wasn't about winning cases or building reputations. It was about truth. Always, only, ever about truth. And that truth had set me free in ways David would never understand. Locked in his cell with his justifications and his pride and the crushing weight of becoming everything he'd once pretended to fight against. Finally slept, dreaming not of prison or trials or the brother I'd lost, but of classrooms full of eager faces, of letters from grateful families, of the slow, necessary work of healing a broken system, one student, one case, one truth at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to teach what David never learned, that justice without truth is just another cage, and I was done with cages, done with lies, done with everything except the hard, beautiful work of setting people free. The story David had started with betrayal. I would end with redemption, not his, which was beyond my power to grant, but theirs. The innocent still trapped, still fighting, still hoping that someone, somewhere, gave a damn about truth. I did. We all did. David's victims turned advocates, refusing to let our pain be meaningless. And that, more than any verdict or sentence, was justice served.